So I can't even, with my feeble communication skills, do justice to the accomplishments of the people you're about to hear from. Every one of them was here last night, had been nominated for Chief HR Officer of the Year. The people who are the panelists. So I'm going to just read off their names. You'll hear from them in just a moment. Ron Guerra, the CHR of MasterCard. Ann Harton, the Global VP of HR for Hayworth, Inc. And I'm hoping these are Hayworth chairs, I'm just saying. Hotel's not talking. Paul LeBach, CHRO of Mohegan Tribal Gaming Authority. Jen Mann, the Vice President of Human Resources, the SAS Institute. Jonna Torsone, Executive VP and CHR of Pitney Bowes. Moderator is Carol Slover. Carol recently stepped down as the CHR of Unitech. Before that, she was with Yellow Book. She also worked for Heartstrings. And then in the saddest and hardest period of her career was the CHR of Connexa, working with me. Okay? Still getting over the trauma, but Carol comes back year after year. So I'd like to welcome our distinguished panel of Chief HR Officers and the moderator for today, Carol Slover, to the stage. Folks, please come up. Big round of applause.
Is everybody good?
We're good.
Yep, we're
Grand.
good. Well, thank you for the introductions, Elliot. And yes, I am still somewhat traumatized by my short stint at Connexa with Elliot. One of the most interesting parts of my career, I'll have to say. So let's get on with introducing the panel. And I know Elliot did very brief introductions, but each of the panel members had given me just a little bit of a bio. And I'll go through those very quickly because the other thing that Elliot mentioned today, which he didn't mention to me earlier, is that every single one of the panel members was nominated and or selected for one of the awards last night. So I feel like my role right now is akin to the news reporters the day after the Oscars when they're all trying to get the story from the Oscar winners. So let me get started. Jen Mann, who I sat on the panel with last year and was a great kind of co-panel member, Jen has been with SAS for 17 years. It was a 2-year plan, and 17 years later, she still loves her work and the people she gets to work with each day. Jen's extremely grateful to be part of an organization that has led the way in business analytics, but also in workplace culture, which we've talked a lot about. This brand recognition has led to SAS being recognized at the top of the Great Place to Work list for 18 years. On a personal note, Jen has 2 teenagers that keep her in check and remind her daily of how much smarter they are than she. Another thing Jen and I have in common, and the one thing I have to say is not only do teenagers remind you of how smart they are, they also remind you of how old you are. I had suggested to my teenage son that he post something on Facebook the other day, and I may as well have suggested that he carve it in stone and deliver it. His reaction was quite hilarious. So obviously, you know, posting things on Facebook makes me very, very old. Anyway, welcome, Jen. Ann Harton, who's the Vice President of Global Human Resources for Hayworth, I apologize. Ann's a non-traditional CHRO with a background in management, sales, operations, and IT. And we have a couple questions around the non-traditional CHRO in the discussion. So welcome, Ann. Jonna Torsone, Executive Vice President, Chief Human Resource Officer for Pitney Bowes. And Jonna has worked with 4 CEOs at Pitney Bowes, which I think is really an incredible accomplishment, because one of the things that I've noticed as a trend is that CEOs tend to look to almost replace their CFO and the CHRO when they come in. And Jonna has, you know, proven to be so valuable that she's worked at Pitney Bowes and supported 4 different CEOs in the organization. So I think, to me, that starts to be indicative of the fact that the CHRO is almost as important or more important than the CEO, because clearly they're replaceable and you're not. I definitely wouldn't say that. Anyway, Cowell Lawback, Senior Vice President, Chief Human Resource Officer at Mohegan Sun, has over 27 years of combined operations human resource experience and is well known for a lot of the work that Mohegan Sun has earned a lot of rewards and accolades, large part to Cowell's work. He previously worked at companies like UPS and Southwest Airlines, which is also very well known for their employee recognition and their treatment of employees. So welcome to you.
Thank you.
Ron Garrow, Chief Human Resource Officer at MasterCard, has more than 28 years of experience in the financial services, payments, and technology with focus on human resources and organizational development. Throughout his career, Ron has had several roles, including Chief Learning Officer, Head of Executive Development, and various other roles, all that reinforce his commitment and passion to create a company that is most valued to work for. So again, please welcome all of our distinguished panel members. I hope I captured everything. I'm going to start with a question that I will direct, and I'm going to direct the questions to one or two of the panel members to start, but that doesn't mean that any one of them can't jump in. We were just trying to a little bit stay on task and stay focused. I think our time is probably about 10 minutes short because we were running behind. So we have two choices here. We can speed it up and try to get back the 10 minutes, or we can make it really interesting so that people don't notice that they're 10 minutes behind eating lunch. So I think that's going to be our approach. The first question over to Jen and Cowell is, according to Deloitte's 2015 HR Trends Report, culture and engagement was rated the most important overall issue. How does your organization rate and measure employee engagement? And do you agree that it's the most important issue?
Well, I'll start.
Perfect.
First, absolutely, it's the most important issue. I think if you don't address those things, all culture and engagement, you're not going to succeed at the other things. You can spin your wheels, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I get this question a lot, so I've tried to reference external data points to help have some models. And there was a really great research that came out at the end of last year by Burson. And they talked about creating the simply irresistible organization. I don't know if others saw it, but when I read it, it really spoke to our organization on the things that we focus on that impact employee engagement. And they talked about 5 key elements. The first one being meaningful work. So not only having the context of what you do at every level of the organization, understanding how it impacts the customer, but also having some level of freedom about how you go about doing your work, which is something that's incredibly important to millennials. The second is having great management, so getting coaching, getting feedback, and being treated with respect by your leadership was real important. The third, creating a wonderful work environment. So it's not just the aesthetics and the actual facilities and the place that you show up, but having a sense of inclusion and having some flexibility and having a place that is a joyful place to be was really important and highlighted in that. Trust in leadership, so leadership doing what they say they're going to do, feeling like profit is not everything. And I think about we're a privately held company, so sometimes we can make decisions that publicly held companies cannot. That might be for the greater good of our employees, but that's something that's real important to us. And then being given growth opportunities. That's something that employees look for. And those are things that are those have been real important to us at SAS.
Okay.
Yep.
Cal?
Well, no, I don't think culture is important.
Now that you have the award, it's all.
Yeah. As a disciple of Southwest Airlines, I certainly can attest to the difference and what the value of a good culture brings to an organization. A lot of the things that I learned at Southwest, I'm currently doing for Mohegan Sun. I think, the most interesting thing outside of Southwest Airlines was how business, mucks up the whole process of interpersonal and just being able to, really be yourself and not have to worry so much about business and I should have prefaced the fact that Elliot asked me to be on this panel to make it look stupid, because you got all of these smart people, and I'm just going to dummy it down. So you'll have to bear with me.
I don't think
But
that's the case.
the simplicity of business is actually just as simple as interpersonal and being happy with one another. And I think that one of the things that we're doing with Mohegan Sun, and I think doing quite well, as we just achieved, with Jen and SAS, we've now been recognized as a best place to work. And the engagement of team members and understanding and seeing that the fact that their company cares about them is more important than the paycheck. And we all see, compensations number 5 or number 6 or whatever, depending on the survey, it's always low on the totem pole. All of the interpersonal aspects are always high. And so on an industrial organizational psychology level, you have to win the hearts and minds of your people. I'll just give you a real quick quote because I want to keep it moving. But Herb Kelleher, foremost CEO in the history of modern business when it comes to behavioral management, said the business of business is people. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you have to win that battle to really secure the hearts and minds of your people before you're going to find that productivity, or more importantly for us in the hospitality business, before they're able to win the hearts and minds of the guest. And that's really, the key element, the secret sauce that I would say with regard to culture.
Okay. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this question before we move on?
I'll take it from a little bit of a different tact.
Okay.
Because Pitney Bowes is a 95-year-old company.
Yeah, it's a little different.
We've gone through several transformations, and we're in a major one now as we shift into the digital e-commerce space, which we've been doing over several years. And we've had a new CEO that came in 3 years ago. And for him, we put a very clear strategy, but he said strategy won't mean anything unless the culture goes with it.
Yeah.
So we had to really examine what are the things in the culture that are important to retain, and what are the things we have to change. And we used the engagement survey as a measure for that. And we were thrilled this last year that we had a 90% engagement of participation.
Yeah.
And we just saw it soar. And because it's been a strong focus tied to the business strategy. So the areas of client focus and teaming, which were critical to our business strategy, were the focus of what we've been working on for the last several years.
Yeah. That's important, because I think the culture in an organization that's that old is almost more difficult than a brand new organization where everything's new and you can set the culture. It's almost akin to when you buy an old house and you have to, fix everything. There's parts of that house that you love, and how do you retain those parts, but make it functional and safe and all of those things for living in today. And to me, that's an analogy that's very different than when you buy a brand new house.
Well,
it's easy.
It's hard, but it's exciting. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think it gets any better for an HR organization or an HR leader to be continually part of that kind of transformation.
It's nice to work somewhere where there's history.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Shall we move on to the next question? All right. There's an increasing trend for the CEO to bring in a non-HR professional to fill the CHRO role. How do you think this impacts an organization, and how can HR leaders do more to prepare their next level for the future CHRO role? And we're going to have Ron and Ann weigh in on this question, but I think Jonna might have some good, interesting points on this, because this question is kind of two-part. The question is about the trend and the benefits, pluses and minuses of a non-HR person in that CHRO role, but it's also about how do you, as HR leaders, bring your next level up so that they are ready for that CHRO role, whether it's within your organization or another organization. So it's a kind of two-part question. And I think different members of the panel can weigh in on different pieces of it. Ann?
So first of all, I think that thank goodness for people who choose to go into HR as a career, because people like me who didn't need you really badly. And it's been an interesting journey for me because actually I was a sales manager here in Philadelphia, believe it or not, and then ran an operation outside New York, and then got into IT because the company I was working for wanted a business person to lead the IT effort. And I was in IT from '93 to 2012. I came to Hayworth as the CIO, and when our HR leader left in mid-2008, he looked for a replacement, couldn't find the right cultural fit, speaking of culture being so important, and asked me if I would do it temporarily, and that was in the summer of 2008.
They
and
always trick you with that temporary.
Indeed, indeed. And I would tell you, my degree is in industrial psychology, and all of my internships in college were in HR. So I always wanted to be one of you, but I just never had the guts. And so when I took it over, I just really found myself and fell in love with it. But I will tell you that the key to being successful, obviously for any of us, is just being great leaders and having a vision and driving to that vision. And so that is a transferable skill from many, many walks of life. The key to being successful in HR is that you've got really great people who know how to execute within that context and within the rules and regulations and administration that kind of burden us every day, but that also, when done really, really effectively, free us to fulfill those visions of truly adding value. And I think that, I will say one thing about that, when I took over, our team had largely been relegated to being an administrative body. And unfortunately, they kind of let themselves be relegated to being an administrative body. And I saw this great potential, and that was the thing that I could come in with fresh eyes and say, okay, we're going to rev this up. We're really going to start having fun. And it took a little bit of time to convince them, but I would say in the last 4 years, it's been truly transformational, and we've had a lot of fun. So I've been doing it since 2008, and I plan to do it for a while.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Ron?
I think last night she said she was going to do it another 10 years, I believe. So,
You did ask me that question,
yeah,
yeah.
we did talk about that. You know, I think a couple things. There's a couple trends that I see happening. Actually, you see folks from the business going into HR, but you also see, I think, another trend that you see a lot of folks that maybe came up through the traditional HR business partner path or compensation that would prepare you for a CHRO role. I also think you're seeing kind of another wave of CHROs that are coming out of kind of the talent management and learning space as well. Because, you know, I think what's on CEOs' minds, it is about the talent agenda, right? It's about the people, and how do you align the people with the organizational strategy. But I think another piece that is just on all of us, and how I'm preparing, you know, my leadership team, is we got to be business junkies. You've got to understand the business. And I know sitting at the table, you know, I do not lead with HR. I lead with the business, and then how do I align what needs to happen from an HR perspective, you know, to the business. And you may say, well, Ron, that's common sense. But, you know, I still find the trappings when I watch my directs and they're interacting with my peers, the executive committee members at times, leading with HR kind of, you know, solutions and programs and kind of HR speak versus really kind of leading with the business. So I think being that business junkie is important. How do we prepare our folks to really be focused on the talent of the organization, and how are we a few steps ahead of the organization? You know, you hear that old saying, sorry, it's a sports analogy, but you skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is. And I think in HR, we have to be doing that. And ultimately, we've got to be a consumer-driven HR organization. In my mind, when I wake up every morning, there are 10,302 employees at MasterCard, and they're my consumer. And what am I doing to create a difference or a quality of interaction with HR as the consumers of the organization? So just a few
Excellent.
thoughts.
Jonathan?
So, yeah, I just make a couple of observations. I'm on the board of the Human Resources Policy Association, which Roger mentioned last night. And we've been studying these trends about what's happening with the CHRO role, not from the standpoint just of whether they're coming from outside of HR, but how successful are they when they get into the C-suite? And it's a kind of a startling statistic when you look at, you know, you think, well, when a CEO changes, the CHRO changes. But in the first 3 years, about 29%, so 29% turnover of CEOs, but there's a 39% turnover of CHROs. So the question for us as leaders of the profession is, well, what is this telling us, and how do we prepare our talent, wherever it is in the organization, to be at that C-level capability, because the bar is continually going up.
Yeah.
The demands of that position are going up. The involvement of the board of directors into human capital issues is escalating. And so as a result of that, the ability to operate at that C-level, operate with the board is a key element. In addition, of course, part of that is deep understanding of the business. So that requires, those of us that are in the job to make sure we are, as Ron said, getting them prepared, moving them around as much as we can to all aspects of it and making sure they do understand the business. And we are developing, those of us in the leadership position, several programs to make sure that we are preparing the upcoming CHROs and new CHROs of the job, linking them up to mentors with senior CHROs, so we increase the potential for success. And I have to say, of course, I have to talk about, one of my greatest joys is developing, my own team, and I have to say, recently I had a CHRO, I had a HR meeting, and my business partners, particularly one in the room, she played the role of the business leader, talking about the business strategy, and the head of business, the tag team with her, did the HR agenda. So, and that to me is a role modeling of what we need to be for the future.
It's excellent.
So.
Anybody else on that one?
Well, I was just going to add, it's pretty obvious HR is kind of, if you doing well, is in every part of the business. So it's a very unique position in the organization to be, because you are expected to know a little bit about every piece of it. In fact, at SAS, when we've lost candidates in HR, many times it's been to the business, to be their chief operations officer. And while we hate to see that happen, it's a huge compliment to say that
that's a huge compliment.
those individuals have been adding value to the business in a way that they want to have them sitting with them. So I agree with everything that you're saying.
Excellent. I'll go on to the next question. There's an increasing trend in a lot of organizations, not all, and SAS is one that's kind of not part of this trend, as Jen and I have talked about. But there is an increasing trend in a lot of organizations to have large contingent workforces. So the question at hand is, how do you manage the contingent workforce? How do you balance that with your full-time workforce? And maybe just some pros and cons to managing both a full-time workforce. I've seen the contingent workforce work very well, where it fills some seasonal gaps and things like that, but it seems to be becoming more and more of a trend. And I thought, there's probably a couple people on the panel that could speak to that. And Jen, if you want to weigh in at the end about how SAS doesn't do this and maybe the philosophy around that.
Sure.
Ron, do you want to start?
Be glad to start, but I think we're in a very similar situation, I think, to SAS. We do not use a large contingent workforce. It's relatively small in our business model. But I can see for us, particularly on the technology side, where that opportunity for us to do more of that, particularly as we're driving MasterCard to be more of a consumer-driven technology organization, and how do you really leverage that contingent workforce? But on the personal level and with MasterCard, have not had much of a challenge there. So I don't know that I can say that I'm an expert in that. I'll probably have to lean on some of my peers. So.
We've quite a bit.
Ann?
So because we're a manufacturer and because we do have seasons, even though it's crazy because we're in office furniture, so it's hard to believe, but we tend to start at the beginning of the year relatively low, and then we have a hockey stick toward the end. And so that drives you to having a higher number of contingent workers. And it's been, it's quite interesting for us because we actually have a goal for a certain percentage, because that allows us to have the flexibility as the seasons change to not impact our full-time people. But I will say that we've been doing a lot of study and have started to reduce that percentage, and we're going to be converting a lot more people to full-time for lots of different reasons. But I will say that it is no small impact that that the healthcare reform is having on our costs, and so it does actually bring your costs closer together. Because the contingent workforce needs to be covered as well, and so there are costs that need to be increased and laid on top of your contingent costs. So it has a bit of impact for us on our decision making. But we find we call them RLPs, but others call them temporary or contingent. They're a very important part of what we do, but we are constantly analyzing the percentage that we want to have for the right flexibility.
Okay. Jonna?
Yeah, we had, my situation is almost the same. We have one part of our business which is where we have large production sites where we consolidate mail for discounts, and we have high peaks in that. And we have had a contingent, which we generally use with a partner. We use Guidon in that. But we do have we are analyzing the same thing. I would make another point, and that is The regulatory agenda in Washington is dead center on this issue. So a lot of the things that are happening, there's a new, you probably have read some of this, but McDonald's is in the eye of this about the franchisees. And that case is, that whole issue is an agenda behind the National Labor Relations Act or the board, that they call it the fractured workforce. And they believe that's part of the reason why we have such economic disparity issues in this country. So they're dead set on that. Same thing with some of the other things that are happening in the FLSA regulations that are coming out. So pay attention to that. And if you're a government contractor, there's a new potential, there's executive order coming out, which is in the process of the regulations being promulgated, which is about how many, you have to keep reporting about your claims or allegations against you. And it's a whole big regulatory scheme. And one of the underlying issues behind that is the joint employer issue.
Yeah.
So I just,
Co-employment.
as you think about this as a strategy, make sure you're thinking about the regulatory environment in which this issue will, I think, become an increasing issue for the U.S. anyway.
Yeah, I've dealt with that co-employment issue a lot, and it's definitely a challenge to make sure that you're balancing and understanding the legal environment you're operating in. So that's really good advice. Anybody else on this issue?
I think we're very similar. We don't use a very large contingent workforce, but and where we do use it, it's advantageous in the fact that we're able to kind of try employees on for size for a little while before we decide to marry.
Kind of the temp to
So
perm
yeah,
concept.
we actually we kind of use it as a temporary basis, especially in our seasonal. We have a racetrack in upstate Pennsylvania here, and on a seasonal aspect, we're able to use a contingent. But we also are very guarded on a human capital side to where we don't do too much contingent. But there is an advantage with regard to some of the temporary type.
Okay, thanks. The next question I think I am going to have everybody weigh in just a little bit on is, and it kind of dovetails onto the contingent workforce very well, and it could be that this will change this environment in one direction or the other, but I think it definitely weighs in. How has the Affordable Care Act not just the impact of it, not just on your benefits, but also on your workforce planning? Because I feel like it's kind of two-level. It's, the benefits planning, and what I've also seen is the interest from others in the organization, especially the CFO, where they've always had interest in benefits. It's very expensive, but I think the Affordable Care Act has gotten a lot more attention on it. And maybe if each of you could weigh in on, how you've managed it within your benefits, how it's impacted your workforce planning, and any kind of information around how your brokers have helped you, manage through all of the new compliance issues and things that HR has to deal with on that.
Well, I'll speak just briefly. I'm sure others want to chime in as well. When I think about SaaS, people are our largest expense, obviously. Everything that we produce comes out of the minds of our employees as a software company. So it's, right behind payroll, our benefits costs are the next largest cost. And we leveraged that pretty heavily as part of our total rewards strategy. When you start with a very comprehensive medical plan where you pay for most services that are not covered under other plans, as well as paying the majority of the cost, in addition to having an on-site full-service medical facility with 50 staff members, free, and those benefits are free of charge to our employees and their families, you can imagine what this legislation has costed at SAS.
Wow.
And we were, at the forefront trying to help explain the impact to businesses who were doing the right thing for their employees, just so that there was an awareness of what the implications were going to be. We have already incurred over $8 million in costs, and it's another $7 million will come because we will be hit with the excise tax. So what has that meant to us? It has meant that we've had to make some changes, probably changes that we needed to make anyway, because when you start with paying for everything and paying all the costs, there's only one way to go, and that's down in terms of what you're providing. So we've had to implement some things that probably just made good business sense anyway, and that's good. That's a good thing. But we've it's really compromised our total reward strategy. We've had to really look at that. We've had to be very transparent with our employees and explain why we've had to make some of the changes. and been very cognizant of trying to make changes that have a minimal impact on the employees, but also preparing us so that we can sustain some of the great benefits that we want to continue to provide to our employees.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So this has been an issue that is obviously very dear to my heart for many years. We started the issue, that whole thing that we talked about yesterday about wellness came from a directive to me in the early 2000s from the CEO that said, you know, our healthcare costs are out of sight. They have to come down, and I want our employees' needs met, and I don't want any of them in my office complaining. So you need to figure that out. And by the way, if you don't think you can figure it out, I can figure it out. So that really began a lot of the things that have now, are in the marketplace around value-based healthcare and sharing and wellness and all that. And we really were on the forefront of that. And as a result of all the things that we've done over the years to educate our employees, we haven't seen, I'll say personally, we haven't seen the biggest major impact in terms of what we've always continued to do. We've had more focus on consumer health. We haven't fully gone there yet as a plan. But the question is, what is it going to be in the future? The big question mark is, for those of you that understand the issue of the excise tax, the excise tax that was put into the Affordable Care Act does not track it doesn't track the healthcare index. It tracks the consumer price index. So at some point in time, it forces everybody into a kind of a vanilla plan at a lower level. Otherwise, you're going to incur, if you can possibly avoid it, a major excise tax. Now, here's my prediction. That's going to be repealed.
I agree.
So the unions hate it. There's a push so it's on both sides of the aisle in Washington. So it's just, in my view, a matter of time. Now, that doesn't solve anything because they paid for a lot of stuff in that. So what that's going to mean is hard to say. There's an organization in Washington that it's a nonprofit that we established called the American Health Policy Institute, which is CHROs in a non-lobbying think tank about kind of where is the future of healthcare and the employment law going to go. Is there going to be an employment system in 2030 or not? And so there's a lot of, we're thinking an awful lot about what that future is going to be like, because it's not sustainable the way it is, but there's things that we can do. And for many companies, it is a critical part of their value proposition. So that depends on where they sit on that continuum of whether they want to be still in it or out of it. But there's so many things to work our way through. And I think you're going to see, I call it healthcare reform 2, because where it sits now is not where it needs to be, but there has to be some change. So stay tuned.
So I would just, I think they've hit on the medical part of it. I would also say, just in our line of work and in our industry of hospitality and in gaming, we have a cyclical nature to our business where business goes up on Friday, Saturday, Sunday for obvious reasons. And so our workforce, based on part-time, full-time, has certainly changed with the operational aspect of this act. And we've had to look at things. We've actually had to erode more full-time into part-time positions to be able to make up for that 30-hour cap. And it's been a very big challenge for us. It's actually been a larger challenge for our employees who don't need the health care but need to subsidize based upon other jobs and come and work at our place for a second job, and retirees and different aspects. So it's definitely been a challenge even on the operational side.
Yeah.
So I would say that just to add one little flavor, and John referenced it, which is consumer-driven health plans. I think there's going to be more and more of those. How many people actually have a consumer-driven health plan, high deductible plan in their organization? So today we have one that we offer, but there's only about 6% of our people participate in it because we've got a decent, actually very nice benefit plan. We don't pay for everything. We've been able to maintain our costs, a couple, 2 to 4% every year increase, which is great compared to the national average. But the consumer-driven health plan is really something that is in our sights, and I think it's being driven by the inevitability of the cost increases. It's going to force our medical providers to be a lot more transparent, because the only way a CDHP works is if people can shop.
Yeah.
And they have to be able to shop across a number of different providers. And but I also think that if you read so I'm going to say something else related to it, which is that if you read the reaction that a lot of people have to the current Affordable Care Act and being insured under it on the open market, is the challenge they have is that initial donut hole, that high deduction at the beginning. So, if you have to spend $6,000 before you get a penny of insurance, for a lot of people that's really hard to do. And so that's where I think we have to be very cautious about the direction we're heading. How do people actually cover that first nut, right, before they can actually start receiving insurance assistance?
A lot of companies have, seeded money in for the CHR.
Absolutely, but how do you get enough?
For the lower, we do a bit of a sliding scale based on people's ability to, because we look at how much do they get in merit or where their pay is versus what the increase is. And if it's over, so we try to keep that in balance.
Yeah.
And we do have we kept a PPO because there's a certain portion of the workforce that really likes it, particularly if they can afford the premium. We make the premiums linked to the value of those plans.
Yeah.
So there's a whole design issue there.
Correct.
And there's an education issue.
Yes.
So how do you get your workforce to really understand the value of it? At a certain point in time, you got to question how valuable will it be if people don't do preventive. So you have to cover the preventive stuff. So there's a whole design issue to it.
Yeah, exactly my point. And it takes time to move people into it. So if you're thinking about doing it, get started. Because if you want to have it be meaningful to you in the next 3 or 4 years, you need to start educating people early.
Yeah, I think the education part is key, making people understand it, because it gets more and more complicated for the employees. So that's all good feedback. Next question is another trend question. There's a lot of trends published. And in the Forbes top 10 workplace trends, number 5 is the continuous job search picks up. And this is really talking to the fact that technology has enabled people to really look for jobs while they're sitting here. I mean, probably 10 of you right now are on your phones looking for a job, but I won't tell anyone. Come on, you know it.
Hiring, right?
I think the challenge is, how do you retain people in that environment where there's very minimal effort that is involved in someone either looking for a job or recruiters finding people? And I know we probably have some recruiters in the room, but as an HR professional, it does become a real challenge that, even if you have amazing companies, and I think really every single one of you works for amazing companies that does great things, how do you kind of, keep people from not looking? Because the key to retention is have them not look. So how do you keep ahead of that technology piece, especially with the younger workforce?
Just shut down the internet. Oh, that's the wrong answer? Oh.
Pretty good answer.
I think we heard a lot of good things this morning on exactly that point. Certainly Beverly, talked about how do you keep that emotional connection. And certainly the insights from Wharton, I thought were the gentleman from Wharton, the professor from Wharton was excellent. In the end of the day, there's people have two quadrants about how they look at their work, right? There's the rational and the emotional. And if that emotional connection is what it should be, it has to take an awful lot of rational to move them into another place. And if that's about money, there's only a limit that you can match. So that's the reality in which, so that emotional connection piece for the talent that you want to keep is the best that you can do in terms of, assuming your pay is in line with competitiveness. I think we heard it this morning.
Yeah.
I would add, which is funny because I just met with Jobrate, so I told him I'd give him a shameless plug right now. But the software Jobrate is really amazing. If you haven't looked at it, you should. Just the fact of tracking from LinkedIn, from all of these different social media sites, you can actually see the trends of your employees and what they're monitoring or what they're looking at. So that can be good or bad. I mean, obviously, if you're a good organization, you can use that information to, have early intervention. If you're a bad company, you may be pulling the person in and, telling them quit wasting their time on the internet. But I personally think that on an organizational level, don't want to get too much back into culture, but that evolution, or I call it ecosystem, of people turning over is a good thing, as long as you feel comfortable with your culture and you believe that you're rewarding people properly and that you're giving them, the best advantages of your organization. If those who choose to leave, that's a good thing. I think it, again, is kind of an evolution of your organization. Now, if you have a bad organization and you're losing good people, certainly Jobrate can help you, kind of monitor what that is happening.
You know what, I'll make a couple comments here, but it's interesting. I've been with MasterCard a little over 5 years, and when I started in 2010, and I'm just giving a few headlines so you can see how the workforce is changing, we had less than 10% millennials in the organization, and today I'm tracking about 33, 34% millennials. So, you're dealing with this diverse workforce. A couple things we had to quickly do is we eliminated years of experience out of our job descriptions. And some of this was the history of MasterCard. Our job descriptions were 10 to 15, 15 to 20 years of experience. But what I started to see is that as we were bringing kind of this younger generation in, they were looking at the job descriptions a few years into the company and going, wow, there's no way I can achieve this. So we did that, and then a couple other things, not silver bullet, to Beverly's point this morning, but I introduced a concept called smart moves and getting people really thinking about their careers from taking lateral steps, so that it's not always movement up. And then we introduced now called Smart Steps, which is kind of a job shadow program. Interestingly enough now, and I think Jen, you've got this too, 4 out of every 10 jobs posted at MasterCard are filled by our own internal employees now. Actually, last year we finished up at about 43%. But it doesn't solve all of it. Employees, the number one reason employees leave us is career development, and we have single-digit turnover, which sometimes is a good problem, or single-digit turnover, which sometimes is a good problem. Actually, sometimes I wish I had a little more turnover, right, to create some oxygen in the organization. So, but yeah, it's interesting.
And I just wanted to echo that. Our turnover is low. It can be good and bad.
Yeah.
But what we started to see over the last couple of years is that we started to lose our high potential, some of our technical, critical experts, and that's not what we want. So really trying to dissect and understand that a little bit more, leveraging data to see, are these people applying for positions, not getting them? How can we have points of contact with them earlier on? Because a lot of times they do leave, but we also find that the grass is not greener and they call us back. So how do we
We've
not?
had that, yes.
Yeah, and usually it's managers would like to say that it's pay. It's not. Pay does not cause the employees to go outside and look. Now that might be what seals the deal for them when they get out there and start looking. But we're trying to leverage our engagement survey that we talked about at the very beginning.
Yeah.
We know that the lowest scores that we get are on career coaching and development and feedback. And so we were very transparent. We started our Q1 webcast this year, sharing our trust index scores, publicizing where managers needed to do better, and put a plan in place for what we were going to do to address some of those areas.
Excellent. Ann, anything on that?
Well, other than shutting down the internet.
Yeah, I like that.
Right. One of the things that we've been doing is taking our engagement survey and connecting it to, we actually do a cultural survey, which is separate from the engagement survey. And it's about what kind of organization do we want to be? And you can't ever be just one, but it's sometimes you've got parts of your organization that are high control, and they have to be. Finance and IT tend to be pretty high control. And then you've got groups that are creative, or those that are competitive and market oriented, or those that really want to collaborate and more clan. And we take our engagement score and we layer it over that, and then align it to the KPIs of the organization, which also gives us a sense of whether we're driving the right things from engagement to get to the culture that we want. So they're very much connected, but at the end of the day, it's the satisfaction of the we call them members, by the way, at Haworth, of the member, and how they feel about their supervisor, which is always tracked, and their potential. And so we've invested quite a bit in an entire member development program. And that's been heavily invested in over the last 4 years and has made a significant difference in the way leaders behave, but also the sense that our members have of opportunity to expand their influence and gain opportunities. So, you know, we're pretty happy with our turnover at this stage. I mean, it's good, it's healthy, quite frankly, to have some, but it's a really important part of what we measure.
Excellent. We're down to the last question, which I guess is good because the big clock is saying we have 2 minutes left. So hopefully you'll graciously give us a couple more minutes to let everybody weigh in on this last question because it's kind of a good one. I've touched on a few of the published HR trends, and you know, you kind of always find these things very interesting that you wonder who added to this information that's published all over the place. But I wanted to ask each of you, in terms of what do you see as your organization's biggest challenge for 2015? You know, aside from the trends, you know what the real world is, and I think we've got a good mix of companies, both old and new. What do each of you think is your HR team's biggest 2015 challenge?
We have a multi-generational workforce. I know just about every company in the room would probably echo that.
Yeah.
Our average age is 46, 47. We have employees that have been with us for a very long time. Average tenure is about 12 years. We still value those long-term employees, but we've got to make way for the new generation, and also making sure that the employee value proposition that has been so strong all these years is still relevant to that generation. So we're spending a lot of energy on not only building pipeline of new talent, but also hearing from them on what kind of SaaS they'd like to see for the future.
Okay.
So I would say, well, first of all, I would say that talent is always the most important challenge for us. It's also, as I said, we're going through major transformation of the company. So and it's both, from a strategic perspective and a cultural one and a talent one. So there's many dimensions to it. And so helping the organization, enabling the organization on multiple dimensions is our challenge and our opportunity. Because I don't think, from where I sit, I don't think it gets any better for HR professionals to be part of what we're part of now. On the downside, the expectation is just continually, the bar keeps raised, and you don't get a lot more money to do it. So the challenge of how do you meet all these demands at the same time keep your budgets in the expected level is just the continual challenge that I've faced it for years, but it just feels like given the importance of everything we're doing now, it's just even a higher challenge. Yeah. So I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. Okay. I would say building on both of the statements and not discounting either one of them, one of the things that we're endeavoring to do this year is identify the right HRIS systems how many people are completely and utterly satisfied with their HRIS? That's what oh, you really? We need to talk. Okay, good. Please come see me. Workday. See, I told you, it's like crack for HR leaders. No testing, please.
That's what you get when you put a CIO in an HR role.
Exactly. Well, and see, isn't that funny, right? But anyway, other than Workday, which I'm sure is amazing, it's really hard to find the right. We've got a lot of different solutions, and to become more efficient, to Jonna's point, we have to take some of the challenge and out of the work that it takes us to provide our internal metrics for HR, as well as our metrics for our organization around their people. We've done a lot of improving of that, but when I look at what my team has to do to produce those dashboards for departments and for our own organization, it's just a whole lot of work. And so finding the right HRIS system for that is something that we're endeavoring to focus on. And please, I do not want all the IT people in the room to come talk to me later, but that's what, I'm just being honest.
I was going to say, you do have a lot of vendors.
Exactly.
I've got
to, look at the time, got to run.
That's good.
So I think for us, it's a unique challenge with the proliferation of gaming. Massachusetts coming online. We have a lot of increased competition, which probably drives going back to human capital and getting into the differentiator and trying to really drive our guest service scores and Probably on top of that is the fact that we are in multiple different growth into different jurisdictions. And so with that growth, being able to protect our culture and really continue to do the things that we do so well, not bragging, but to be able to put that into these new operations and ensure that we blow our team members away.
Okay.
I'll bring it home in maybe 20 seconds. Really two things for us. One is, and John had touched on it, it's a cultural transformation. When you're going from seen as a credit card company to a tech company in the payment space, again, multiple levers and things that you're really trying to drive in the culture, and how do you achieve that? So, that keeps me up at night. But the thing that I would say that we're really focused on is managers create your environments, right? And for us, it's around how do we really double down on our managers and either touch on the very things that Beverly talked about, or how do we ensure that the managers are creating that quality of an interaction with their employees, the responsiveness, the hand on the back, because we know that ultimately will drive the culture, it'll drive the engagement, and it'll make us the best place to work.
Totally agree with that.
So
Totally agree with that.
We'll leave it with that.
Excellent. All
Good.
excellent answers. That's really the end of our structured questions. And, I don't know if the panel members are comfortable. I thought I would throw it out to see if anybody in the audience had any specific questions for the panel, just to kind of have the opportunity. I mean, you've got such a wealth of knowledge up here. So we could have, if anybody's interested in standing up with a question, or certainly when we break for lunch, make sure you have a chance to chat with Ann and Jen and Carol and Jonna and Ron. So if anybody has a question now, we'd love to entertain it, even though we're a little bit over time. I hope that's okay. It seems like we do still have everyone's attention. So if there's anything specific anybody wants to ask, otherwise we'll finish up. No questions?
Finishing up.
No
They must be
fire
very
in
hungry.
mine.
Great. Thank you.